used to think I knew what heartbreak felt like. I had read about it in novels, watched it play out in movies, listened to friends whisper about it over wine. But nothing could have prepared me for the reality. A broken heart feels like standing outside a glittering restaurant window, watching your husband of 8 years lean across a table to kiss another woman. It feels like your chest collapsing while everyone else around you continues breathing easily. It feels like dying, but being forced to stay alive, to keep moving, to keep smiling, even when the ground has been ripped away beneath your feet. That Wednesday night, I wasn't supposed to find anything. I was just another tired pharmaceutical executive trudging through another week of endless deadlines. Michael had sent me the same text he'd sent a dozen times before. Working late again, babe. Big client dinner. Don't wait up. It was always the same excuse typed so smoothly that I no longer questioned it. The cologne, the watch I'd bought him on our anniversary, the careful grooming, it all had explanations I accepted without protest. I believed him. Until I didn't. The unraveling began, not with a grand discovery but with a careless mistake. Kelly from accounting accidentally copied me on an email chain that included a lunch meeting Michael claimed had taken place out of town. One tiny lie, but that's how betrayal works, like pulling a single card from a house of trust. Everything wobbles. Suddenly, every business trip and every late night became suspicious. I did what I once would have sworn I'd never do. I hired a private investigator. Was it dramatic? Maybe, but necessary. Absolutely. Within a week, I had a name, Rebecca Wilson, 32, marketing director at a competing firm. Along with the name came photos of candlelit dinners, hotel check-ins stolen, walks in the park. I even had audio recordings I couldn't bring myself to play all the way through. Some wounds are too deep to press into voluntarily. But what broke me wasn't the photos. It was one detail in particular. In a grainy image, Rebecca smiled as she opened a small Tiffany blue box. Inside was the bracelet I had found in Michael's browser history weeks earlier, the one he had sworn was meant as a surprise for our upcoming anniversary. I stared at the photo until my vision blurred, until my tears blurred into laughter and my laughter back into tears again. The investigator's final report included one more piece of information. Rebecca's birthday dinner was planned for Friday night at Maison Laurent, the French restaurant downtown, with a 3-month waiting list, the same place I had been hinting at for months. Michael had told me it was too pretentious, too overpriced, but apparently it was perfect for celebrating his mistress. As if fate were conspiring. The investigator also attached Rebecca's parents' contact information. He had pulled it from her gym's emergency file, suggesting it might prove useful. At first I stared at the number without meaning, but then a thought dark and sharp began to grow inside me. Most affairs survive only in secrecy. What if I stripped that away? My hands were steady as I dialed. "Hello, is this Mrs. Wilson?" I asked softly. My voice did not shake. "You don't know me, but we need to talk about your daughter." The conversation that followed felt surreal. They had no idea about Michael. No idea that their daughter's great new love was a married man. They thought he was divorced. They thought he was her boss. They thanked me for telling them. And then they told me something I hadn't expected. They were flying in to surprise Rebecca for her birthday dinner. Her brothers were coming too. My breath caught, but I forced a smile into my words. What a coincidence. I was planning on surprising them that night as well. When I hung up, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I did not recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were sharp, focused, colder than I had ever seen them. Something inside me had shifted. Michael came home late that night, reeking of perfume that wasn't mine. He kissed my forehead and asked if I had eaten dinner. I smiled sweetly and said I had been planning something for Friday night. His face flickered with panic before he recovered, claiming he had that important business dinner with Chicago clients. I nodded. "Of course," I whispered, "work is so important." He walked away relieved, thumbing out a message to her, no doubt congratulating himself for once again outmaneuvering his foolish wife. Little did he know Friday night would be one he would never forget. Friday arrived, cloaked in the kind of heavy silence that only I seemed to notice. Michael hummed while he shaved that morning, humming the same tune he had hummed on our wedding day when nerves threatened to undo him. I watched him from the doorway, my arms folded tightly across my chest, wondering how I had once mistaken that man for my safe place. He was wearing his best navy suit, the one I had tailored for him last Christmas. "Big night," he said casually, not meeting my eyes. "Don't wait up." I smiled and kissed his cheek, tasting the cologne that still lingered in the air. "Of course," I whispered. "Have fun." As soon as he left, I put on the dress I had bought months ago for an anniversary dinner that never happened. Deep emerald silk, hugging my waist sleeves that draped like waterfalls. My hair I pinned back into a low twist, simple but elegant. And then I picked up my phone. "Mrs. Wilson," I said when Rebecca's mother answered. "Are we still on for tonight?" Her voice was steady, almost too steady, but beneath it was a current of heartbreak. "Yes. My husband and the boys landed this morning. We'll meet you outside Maison Laurent at 8. 8 o'clock. The same time Michael had promised her. The hours crawled by. I walked through the house like a ghost, my heels clicking on hardwood floors, rehearsing every word I might say, then abandoning them all. Did I want to scream, cry, beg him for an answer? Or did I want to remain calm? Let silence expose him better than fury ever could. By the time the car pulled up to the restaurant, my pulse hammered so hard I thought it might split me open. The golden glow of Maison Laurent spilled across the sidewalk where Rebecca's family was already waiting. Her mother's face was pale, lips pressed thin. Her father stood like a man ready for war. The two brothers shifted behind them, shoulders tight with rage. When they saw me, there was a moment of confusion, then understanding. Rebecca's mother gripped my hand. "We'll do this together," she whispered. Inside the restaurant buzzed with low laughter, clinking glasses, the gentle hum of a pianist playing in the corner. The maitre d' raised an eyebrow as our group of 5 approached. "We're here for the Wilson reservation," I said smoothly. His eyes flickered confused, but he nodded and led us through the sea of tables. And there they were. Michael and Rebecca, candles glowing between them, a Tiffany bag perched carelessly on the table. He leaned forward, eyes soft, whispering something that made her laugh. Her hand rested on his intimate certain. For a heartbeat, I just stood there, taking in the picture, the husband who had vowed to cherish me, celebrating another woman's birthday in the very place I had once begged him to take me. The mistress who thought she had won, basking in the glow of stolen love. Then I moved. "Happy birthday, Rebecca," I said, clearly, my voice carrying across the restaurant. Every fork froze midair, heads turned. The pianist faltered. Michael's face drained of color, his lips parted but no sound came. Rebecca's smile faltered as her family stepped forward behind me. Her mother's eyes blazed with betrayal. "Rebecca Wilson," she said, voice trembling. "Is this the man you told us was divorced?" The Tiffany bag tipped, its blue box tumbling onto the floor. Michael reached for me, his voice breaking. "Alex, please let me explain." I stepped back, shaking my head. "Explain what, Michael?" "That you're here celebrating your mistress's birthday while your wife eats leftovers alone at home. That you've lied to me, to her, and to her entire family." Rebecca's father slammed his palm onto the table, making glasses rattle. "You disgrace us," he spat at his daughter. "You disgrace yourself." The restaurant was silent except for the pounding of my heart. Strangers gaped, whispers already spreading like wildfire. Rebecca crumbled into tears. Michael reached for his wallet as though paying the bill could erase the truth now burning in every corner of the room. I stood tall, my hands steady, my voice calm. "Enjoy your dinner," I said softly, turning to leave. "It's the last one you'll ever share this way." For a suspended breath, the entire restaurant held me like a gallery holds a single painting. It wasn't anger that steadied me. Anger is a wild animal, and I needed a scalpel. I watched the shock crawl up Michael's throat and stall in his jaw, watched Rebecca's shoulders fold inward, as if trying to disappear into the stitched seams of her dress. The maitre d' hovered, unsure whether to extinguish a fire or stand back and let it burn. I heard the pianist find a safer melody and then abandon it entirely. And through all of it, I felt the cool bite of my grandmother's pendant against my collarbone, an anchor to a lineage of women who survived the things men swore they would never do. I did not shout. I let the facts do the shouting for me. I placed a small stack of photos on the linen, like a dealer laying down cards months and years of quiet theft, turning face up under the candlelight. Michael in a hotel lobby that wasn't ours. Michael at a winter cabin I'd once pointed to in a brochure and called a someday. Michael's arm unmistakable with its pale scar bracketed around a woman who was not his wife. Rebecca's mother's breath left her as a soft, wounded sound. Her father's was a hiss between his teeth, a man forced to count the ways his trust had been mocked. What surprised me most was the clarity. While they flailed for explanations and exits, a stillness opened in me large enough to hold everything: the Wednesday nights of waiting, the perfume that wasn't mine, the stories that didn't add up if you laid them side by side. I could see all at once how betrayal works: a slow erosion, little floods under doors until the floor gives way. The worst part is not the collapse. It is realizing how long you lived with the water licking your ankles and called it weather. Rebecca pressed her napkin to her face, as if cloth could stop her consequence. Between her fingers, the Tiffany blue ribbon flashed a cruel little comet of celebrations circling a dying star. "He told me you were separated," she said finally, a whisper meant only for me, that nevertheless seemed to cross every table. I studied her, not the Instagram gloss but the thin margin of doubt hiding under it. I wanted to be the kind of woman who only despised her. I was not. I saw fear there and something that looked very much like realization arriving late to its own party. When Michael reached for my wrist, I stepped out of range. Even now, he reached the way he always did, not to hold, but to handle. He said my name in that tone he used when smoothing investors, when calming hotel clerks, when pacifying anyone who threatened to interrupt his arrangement of the world. Once I had mistaken that tone for tenderness. Tonight it sounded like someone rearranging props on a stage that had already been set on fire. His mouth moved explanations, corrections, the familiar choreography of deflection, but each sentence landed with a dull thud against the new architecture of what I knew. I didn't argue. I simply let silence seat itself between us like an unimpeachable witness. It was Rebecca's father who gave the moment its spine. He drew himself up, a large man suddenly made larger by disappointment. He asked plain questions with old-fashioned gravity, and each answer Michael tried to give dissolved into vapor under the man's stare. Somewhere behind us, a server coughed, unsure whether to approach with the cake, whose candles now looked obscene. Rebecca's brothers stepped closer to her, not as accomplices, but as sentries, and for a fleeting second, I envied that simple geometry of protection. The circle closes around the wounded, the wound begins to knit. I remember thinking that if someone had drawn a diagram of the room right, then every breath, every look, it would have looked like a constellation map, lines connecting points of pain across the ceiling. People will tell you public humiliation is vulgar. They are right in a way. But shame grows in secrecy, it starves in daylight. I had lived privately with my humiliation for months, a secret with teeth. Tonight I watched it lose its power in the open air. I turned to the maitre d' and apologized for the disturbance, because manners are bones that hold us up when flesh fails. He nodded, almost bowed the way people do when they witness unnecessary cruelty. Outside, the night had the clean smell of rain about to happen. Sophia waited at the curb, eyes brimming and bright, the kind of friend who will sit in the back seat of a getaway car and say nothing until you are ready to speak. As I walked, I felt Michael move behind me, the air shifting with his approach, and for a second I braced for one last scene. It didn't come. The door closed behind me like a book snapping shut. In the car, my hands shook only once, a small aftershock passing through. Then the tremor left, and in its place came a lucid inventory: bank accounts, safeguarded attorney, retained backups, stored in 3 separate clouds, a future I hadn't dared to name, forming at the edges like land glimpsed through fog. I did not check my phone. I knew what would be waiting there: threats masquerading as concern, pleas masquerading as clarity. I watched the city slide past, instead streetlights, wet pavement, strangers who would never know this was the night my lung made of grief finally exhaled. At home, the house met me with its familiar echoes, but they felt rearranged. The red dress found the back of a chair. The pendant found its dish. I poured water and drank it like medicine. Then I opened the folder where I had laid out my life like a case file. Marriage certificate, prenuptial agreement, mortgage with my name in hard letters, a ledger of things I had carried and things I was putting down. I thought of my mother who used to say that certain truths must be spoken aloud to become real. I said one then, not a curse, not a verdict, but a vow recast, I choose myself. When sleep came, it came like a tide that had been waiting for permission. I dreamed nothing I could remember. Morning would bring statements and signatures, perhaps headlines I did not want. Morning would bring the dull, necessary work of remaking a life. But for the first time in months, morning sounded like a promise. The morning after felt strangely quiet, as if the entire city had agreed to lower its voice. I woke in an empty bed that no longer mocked me with his absence. For years, the cold half of the mattress had been an accusation. Now it was an invitation, a blank canvas, waiting for me to decide what or who would fill it. The sunlight stretched across the hardwood floor, unbothered, almost celebratory, and I allowed myself a long breath I hadn't taken in months. When I finally reached for my phone, the screen glowed with dozens of missed calls and messages. His name appeared again and again like graffiti scrawled across my morning. Please let me explain. You don't understand. We can fix this. The desperation in his words was almost laughable. Last night he had lost control of the narrative. I had taken the microphone he'd always wielded and shattered it in front of an audience. There was no version of the story left that could make him the hero. Scrolling further, I found a message from Rebecca. Just 2 words. I'm sorry. My first instinct was to hurl the phone across the room, but then I sat down with it heavy in my hands. Was she sorry for betraying me or sorry she'd been caught? Was she sorry for the lies or just for the fallout with her family? I didn't reply. Some apologies weigh less than silence. I spent that day putting things in order. I called my attorney and set the divorce papers in motion. The prenuptial agreement I had once resented now felt like divine foresight. My assets, my condo, my security would remain untouched. I closed our joint accounts, redirected my salary into a separate one, and booked an appointment with a financial planner. Each step was like laying bricks on a new foundation, one I was building entirely for myself. That evening, as I prepared a simple dinner, my mind wandered to Rebecca's family. I could still see her mother's face twisted in anguish, her father's hand trembling with rage, her brothers standing rigid like soldiers unsure where to aim their fury. They had believed in their daughter's love story, the way I had once believed in mine. Betrayal doesn't only break hearts, it fractures entire families. I wondered if she had gone home with them or if she sat alone clutching that Tiffany bracelet that now glittered like a shackle. Days turned into weeks, and the story spread faster than wildfire. At first, whispers circulated in Michael's office, then in the wider business community, until even my own colleagues approached me with sidelong glances that blended pity with admiration. Some called me courageous. Some said I had humiliated myself as much as him. But deep down, I knew the truth. For the first time in years, I had chosen exposure over secrecy, light over shadow. Shame doesn't survive daylight. Michael, on the other hand, was unraveling. I heard through mutual acquaintances that the board had begun investigating his expense reports, that his credibility with clients was evaporating. The affair had been the stone that shattered the glass, but underneath lay cracks already forming: arrogance, entitlement, a belief he was untouchable. Now the empire he had built on sand was caving in, and he was grasping at me as though I could save him. But I was no longer interested in being his lifeboat. One Sunday, I found myself at the same church where we had exchanged our vows 8 years earlier. I hadn't planned it. My feet had carried me there almost by instinct. The pews smelled of polished wood and candle wax, the air thick with memory. I sat alone watching a shaft of sunlight fall across the altar where I had once stood radiant and blind. I thought about the girl I had been that day, the one who believed love was a fortress, the one who trusted a man more than she trusted herself. I wanted to hold her, to tell her she would survive, that she would walk through fire and come out not unburned, but unbroken. It struck me then that revenge was never really about them. It wasn't about humiliating Rebecca or destroying Michael's career, though both had happened. Revenge was about reclaiming my voice. For too long, I had swallowed words, smoothed over lies, convinced myself that silence was strength. But silence had only deepened my wounds. Speaking the truth aloud, no matter how messy had been my salvation. In the months that followed, I began to live differently. I accepted invitations. I once turned down, traveled to places I had postponed for some day, and filled my home with friends and laughter instead of waiting for a man who never showed up. I started therapy, where I learned to untangle the knot of grief and guilt I had mistaken for love. I even laughed real unguarded laughter that felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. And then came the letter. It arrived in a plain envelope tucked between bills and advertisements. Inside was a single page in Michael's handwriting. He wrote of regret, of sleepless nights of a life that had collapsed in the ruins of his choices. He asked for forgiveness, not reconciliation, just a fragment of absolution to ease his shame. I sat with that letter for a long time. My hands didn't tremble as they had with Rebecca's Tiffany box or the investigator's photos. I felt no fury, no longing, only clarity. Forgiveness wasn't something I owed him, but I could release myself from carrying the weight of his sins. I placed the letter in a drawer, not to keep, not to revisit, but to bury it in silence where it belonged. Because my life was no longer a reaction to his betrayal. It was mine again, wholly and defiantly mine. The day the divorce was finalized, I stood on the courthouse steps with the papers in my hands. The ink was still fresh, the signatures neat and official, and yet they felt like ancient relics, evidence of a life I had already mourned. A cool breeze swept past, tugging at my coat, and I thought of it as a kind of benediction, the world whispering, "It's done. You're free." Michael didn't show. His lawyer handled everything on his behalf, a fitting metaphor for how he had moved through our marriage absent, when presence mattered most. I half expected him to send another message, another plea for sympathy, but my phone stayed quiet. Perhaps even he knew there was nothing left to salvage. I walked to a cafe across the street, ordered a cappuccino, and sat by the window. Couples passed outside holding hands, leaning close, the way I once thought Michael and I would be forever. For a fleeting second, a pang of grief struck me, but it wasn't for him. It was for the woman I had been, the one who believed she was unbreakable, if only she loved enough. I let myself mourn her in that cafe, surrounded by strangers, then gently released her into memory. In her place stood someone else, someone forged in betrayal and tempered by truth. Someone who could look at a room full of people, at a man who had stolen years and not flinch. I realized then that strength isn't built in the moments we're adored, it's built in the moments we are shattered and choose to rebuild anyway. That evening, I returned home and opened a bottle of wine I had been saving for an anniversary that never came. I poured a glass, sat on the balcony, and let the city hum around me. For once, I wasn't waiting for anyone. The silence was not empty, it was full, brimming with possibility. A week later, I received a call from Rebecca's mother. Her voice was soft, weary, but sincere. She thanked me again, not for the pain, but for the truth. "We would have lived in the dark if not for you," she said. There was a long pause before she added, "I hope you find happiness again. Real happiness." Her words settled over me like a blessing. It struck me that we were all victims of Michael's lies, bound together not by anger, but by the need for truth. In some strange way, I felt less alone. Months passed. I traveled to Paris, a city I had always wanted to see but never visited because Michael dismissed it as too cliché. I stood at the top of Montmartre at sunset, the whole city unfolding beneath me, and for the first time in years, I felt weightless. I was no longer defined by the man who had betrayed me. I was defined by the choices I made, by the courage to keep moving forward. One night in Paris, I dined alone at a small cafe. The waiter, a kind man with silver hair, asked if I was waiting for someone. I smiled and said, "No, I'm here for myself." He nodded as if he understood something profound, and perhaps he did. because that meal savored in solitude tasted more fulfilling than any shared dinner from my marriage. When I returned home, friends noticed the change in me. My laughter came easier. My eyes no longer searched every room for ghosts. I poured myself into my career, not as a distraction, but as a reclamation. I was no longer living in the shadows of what might have been. Sometimes late at night, I think back to that evening at Maison Laurent. The clink of silverware, the gasp of strangers, the look on Michael's face when the world he had so carefully constructed collapsed in a single moment. And I think of the me who stood there steady, unflinching, reclaiming her story in front of everyone. That moment did not destroy me, it remade me. So here I am telling you this story, not as a woman broken by betrayal, but as a woman transformed by it. Pain taught me to be brave. Loss taught me to let go. And betrayal taught me the most important lesson of all, that sometimes the greatest revenge is simply living a life that no longer includes those who tried to destroy you. If my story resonated with you, if you've ever felt the sting of betrayal and the weight of finding your own strength, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more stories of survival and truth. And tell me in the comments, what did you have to let go of to finally set yourself free?